So let's get started. Okay, Loreto, we'll start with you. So Nuevos was born in 2020 out of the work of the government of Chile under President Michelle Bachelet, who is also a pediatrician, among many other things. And so she, under her administration, worked to expand air quality monitoring across the country and use this data to inform action. In 4 years, I think this is amazing, PM 2.5 particulate matter decreased by 25%, sometimes as much as 49%. Emergency room visits by young children due to respiratory symptoms decreased by 28%, and cases of bronchial obstruction fell by 74%. And so you now run the first project across Latin America, covering 8 countries and 48 cities, to engage citizens in measuring air quality in the places where young children play and learn. So first question for you. What results have you achieved so far in terms of policy change, emissions reductions, or improvements in child health outcomes? Loreto, I think you might still be on mute.
Sorry, yes. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. Let me start saying very quickly how important the health of our children is to driving action on reducing air pollution. And if we have followed the news lately, we had a recent paper by Rocky Mountains Institute. They show that 1 out of 8 cases of asthma in children in the US are due to burning natural gas in homes. So as much as having parents smoke. So the attention that this has gotten is because the framing was clear. Burning things at home is bad for the health of the children, and yet air pollution has much bigger impact. And exposure is constant, and each breath of pollution hurts us, finally. This project is inspired by trying to show there is a problem to be addressed. The measures taken since 2014 under President Bachelet air pollution programs, as you said, Patrin, contributed to 30% reduction of respiratory emergency rooms between 2013 and 2019. Less air pollution equals less emergency rooms visits. And in the case of Chile, nearly 400,000 cases per year. We wanted to expand air quality measurement to places where there wasn't information, and we were able to deploy this project in pandemic, shipping these monitors to many cities, and the company that we use, this IQAir, in their annual report recognizes that this measurement contributed to improved monitoring coverage in South America by 50%. So regarding political changes, this intervention has led, for example, to municipal ordinances that ensure the measurements of air quality in areas with high concentration of children, like schools or recreational centers, regardless of the type of government that is on duty. So this is the case of Lima, Peru. They developed an ordinance that promotes clean air for children in the province of Lima, and is currently in the stage of public consultation and aims at ensuring that the air monitoring is continuous, that is complemented with education, with public awareness, with action to reduce exposure, with evaluation of the actions that are taking place. In the case of Chile, for example, the political work managed to incorporate clean air as an article for the constitutional proposal that was submitted to a plebiscite. It was unanimously approved by the convention, and hopefully that we're starting a new stage in the new constitution. We hope that it will be, of course, introduced again. At a more local level, this monitoring has allowed the preschools and schools to plan their schedules to exercise based on air quality information. That is, by looking the app or the web page, even the monitor screen, they can see if it's time to do gymnastic or not, so they can avoid of course, greater environmental load on children during playtime. As they become aware of the air that children are breathing, teachers and parents started carrying their own actions to protect the children. So, for example, citizens campaign to turn off the engine while parking, or free to play outside campaign to highlight the importance for a good air quality in playgrounds. And this empowerment, of course, has allowed them to demand greater supervision and action to municipalities regarding, for example, wood burning or traffic measures. Regarding emission reductions, after Nuevos local actions, after this program, we have data from Lima so far, since we completed the stage of the project, with transformation of 5 public spaces that involve 10 schools and 1 residential care center. I'm going to show you one slide. So I don't know if you can see it very well.
Yes, looks great, looks good.
Good, okay. So for example, this Lima, they started an intervention, public space intervention in air quality in the School of Fe y Alegría in a very poor area called Juan de Lurigancho. And this intervention took place between November 2021 and February 2022. And they benefited 1,200 children with whom several workshops and experiments on air quality took place. And they cleaned the area, they paved the surface to avoid dust racing and planted vegetation in the surrounding area. So more than 600 square feet of green areas were recovered. So this allowed to reduce air pollution by 45%. And this action also triggered other type of activities such as calming zones for children through the installation of urban furniture, safe route to schools, murals, as you can see with murals that are shown in the school facades with environmental messages, etc. I'm gonna get out of the screen. So this is, I don't know if I can see. So if we manage to find more funding, we hope to achieve more improvement in children's health after the local actions in the next phase of the project. So for us, funding is a really big issue to complete further actions. We know that environmental pollution is an enemy of children, of course, and we saw that in the many places that we are measuring, there is no city that is meeting the new HOOD guidelines. The only exception is Tierra del Fuego in Patagonia, that is close to Antarctica, but we need to continue to work on this project because every day we see new research showing how pervasive effects of pollution on the health of our children and the cities and air quality that is already in place is taking action, and we hope to keep going with this several action that are already taking place in Monterrey and Buenos Aires and Chile so far. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think this is it's such a really clear example of how you can use air quality monitoring and that local to drive change at so many different levels. You've talked about reducing exposure by choosing when the children choose when to go out and play. Then you've talked about reducing local emissions by having the campaigns against idling the engines outside of the school. And then you've talked about the big picture, amazing policy level changes around city ordinances to promote clean air for children. And then the amazing success around clean air in the Constitution for Chile. And then very importantly, as you've noted, there's no city that's currently meeting the guidelines. So there's a real enforcement issue there. And then of course, funding is really critical as well. Great. Well, I'm sure that our audience is going to have a lot of questions for you. We'll move on to the next couple of speakers and then come back afterwards. So Maria, over to you. So Ironbound Community Corporation, we've been inspired by your work since we first heard about it. It's a 50-year-old organization set up by and for the residents of the Ironbound Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey, in the US, to develop community-led solutions for community priorities and needs. Your long list of achievements covers affordable housing, high-quality childcare, and worker cooperatives. Your industrial history is reflected in the name Ironbound, which refers to the many forges and foundries and railroads that once surrounded the neighborhood. And today, as you mentioned, when we first joined, the 55,000 residents in Ironbound live close to factories, warehouses, a power plant, chemical refineries, and New Jersey's largest garbage incinerator. So air pollution is a major problem. But in 2020, ICC successfully lobbied to help pass the strongest state environmental justice law in the US. So much to ask you about, Maria. The first question, Ironbound was originally started to provide childcare and other family services for child development. That's right? So why did you expand from childcare to air pollution? And what did that change in the way that you work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, It is incredible history that I'm really proud. I always say I stand on the shoulders of giants in our community who got together, honestly, because the women wanted to go back to work and we didn't have accessible childcare in the neighborhood. So, I often get named questions about our name, our community corporation, right? It's not as cool in 2023. But when we were founded, people thought that we could take back corporate power, right? And make it community corporations. And so one thing that was very clear to the residents of our neighborhood was um how we couldn't just focus on education when it comes to young students, right? Like if we focused all our time on education, we were neglecting their health. And a lot of the students in our early childhood center were displaying intense asthma. Actually, Ironbound has 4 times the asthma rate as the rest of the country. 1 out of 4 kids here has asthma, right? And that's a conservative study because we have such a large undocumented population that often doesn't go to the hospitals for help. So there were explosions actually happening in the neighborhood near the schools. One prominent explosion happened in a warehouse that was across the street from the school. And that was clear to the teachers and the parents who were at the school how important we needed to address like the environment around us because it was actually on fire. And in the history of the Ironbound, we're to step back here a little bit. We're a 4 square mile neighborhood that is surrounded by what is the longest Superfund site in the country. And Superfund in the US is the highest level of toxic pollution. That's because during the Vietnam War, we were also producing Agent Orange here and then dumping that dioxide in the river and it was getting across the neighborhood. Our neighborhood actually has 3 power plants, right? We're 4 square miles, we have 3 power plants. That picture behind me is from a fight against our 4th power plant, that a natural gas plant that was attempted to put in the neighborhood. We're still in the middle of that fight. We have the largest garbage incinerator, and we're next to the port of Newark and New Jersey, which is where 80% of the consumer goods that come into New York City come through that port, right? So they come through that port on a truck. Our neighborhood actually conducts truck counts. We count trucks on corners, on tally marks, and that's how we get a lot of the neighborhood engaged, right? Of just counting the trucks. And we count more than 5,000 trucks in a day, just on different intersections. So when you imagine that particulate matter coming out of those diesel run trucks, and unfortunately, we don't have great regulation at the ports. So we have some of the oldest trucks that are running in the country servicing our port, and they're just running through our neighborhood right by our schools. You can actually take a picture where there's a truck and a plane in the background, right? We also have the airport right next to us. So it sounds like a crime scene. I think it is a crime scene. The amount of air pollution that kids in our neighborhood are exposed to. So while we're gardening, we do have community gardens as part of our organization. As we're gardening, we'll have trucks rolling by, you'll hear the kids coughing in reaction, you have planes going by, and then you see the smokestacks around you. So that was very important for us to think about holistically in our neighborhood, how do you actually take care of children? And it can't just be by providing good education, it also has to be by fighting the institutional situations, the systemic problems that exist in their neighborhood. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you, Maria, for painting such a vivid and powerful picture of what the air is like in your neighborhood and what the children and indeed all of the adults as well are dealing with. And that's a very interesting point about the trucks and how you get the neighborhood engaged in counting them. And I think we'd love to come back to that in a little bit. First, we'll hear from Simon Battisti. So Simon, the Relationship Center is another organization that didn't start out explicitly working on air pollution, right? You're urban planners and designers who do pioneering work in Tirana, in the capital of Albania, to support the health and well-being of babies and toddlers by turning public space, which I remember learning that streets are something like 70% of public space in a city on average, into safer, healthier, and more playful spaces for children and families. So your work on 6 school streets in Tirana has given 10,000 residents access to a protected play space within a 5-minute walk from their homes, which we know is really important for for parents with caregivers with very young children who it takes a long time to get anywhere with a small child, led to an average 35% reduction in speed among cars, inspired the broader city government of Tirana to budget for 12 permanent school streets this year, and is inspiring more work on school streets elsewhere in the region, in Kosovo and Slovakia as well. So really inspiring stuff. Can you tell us a bit about what are some of the physical changes you've made in school streets and why? And when did you start integrating a focus on clean air, and what difference has that made?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Can you see this image? Because I'll kind of talk to this image.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we started working on school streets because it's just this. Schools are in every neighborhood. So it's something that, in terms of scale, it's, if you can work on all of them, it's a unit that is going to be repeatable, basically. And it's where the most kids are at any given time, basically, except when they disperse back to their homes. The school is the place that collects the most young lungs and brains in the city every day. So we observed at schools this kind of chaos, especially in the morning at the drop-off, sort of all throughout the city. The condition that you see in the bottom image is pretty standard. And in general, in Tirana and in Balkan cities, to be a pedestrian is to really be sort of weaving your way between cars. There's just not very much pedestrian infrastructure, especially on smaller neighborhood streets, that protect from cars. And so not only are you constantly at risk of being hit by a car, just the physical collision, but of course also the air pollution and noise, and then resulting stress from caregivers for younger kids. So then in front of schools, you have these moments of just real intensity of the presence of vehicles trying to slowly sort of overtake each other and drop people off. And so the purpose of the redesign of the school streets is to really kind of calm that chaos and basically give drivers no options other than just to move very slowly and in a straight line. And so you can see in the project, what we do, we typically take away a lane of parking, reduce everything into one single lane, moving in one direction. We lower the speed limit from 30 to 20 kilometers an hour. And then essentially everything that's left in that street section is given to pedestrian space. And this is really, this project is very much about that 30 minutes before school starts, but it's also really intended to be a public space that works well for people all day long. And that's part of what sort of the ambition is, to make these spaces really loved by the public, really embraced as useful all day long, even into the evening. And sort of, the health and well-being of those kids is really, really key. But in addition, we've always felt that it needs to do more than that. It needs to be really, it needs to just work really well for everyone. And so I think we started, so the air pollution from vehicles is a really big issue. And what we really think about a lot is just how to reduce kids' exposure to vehicles around the city. We really want to basically make as large of a buffer from the vehicle and the child as possible throughout the city. And 3 meters can actually make a big difference in how much toxic air kids are breathing. So that's a big part of the project. And I think also just going back to scale, I mean, I think the school streets are really it's really important that whatever we do at one of these streets can be replicated everywhere else in the city. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later in terms of how we speak about this work with communities. But our approach is really that kids' health and well-being is really not negotiable. Every single street in front of a school has to be protected, and it should have been protected 20 years ago. But if we, if we can start, if we can finish them this year, we really should. And we really work with mayors and city administrations kind of on this point that you can't go into neighborhoods and ask permission to protect our kids' health. It's just not, it's not the position that any one of us should really be in. And what we can do, we can ask people's input on building the identity of the place and making it, again, loved, and building community through those activities and interactions between stakeholders. But whether or not we should make these physical changes is never, we don't pose that question to anyone ever. And luckily we have the political will to support that and back us up in Tirana and in some of the other cities that we're starting to work with around this. But yeah, I mean, this should just be understood as a kind of standard geometry in front of schools from now on. That's really how we approach it.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for sharing the visual as well of the physical geometry. And I think that point is really interesting, of that you're making it non-negotiable, and really struck as well again by how you're zooming out from this small repeatable unit and even this moment in time of the 30 minutes that's broader out to the city, broader out throughout the day, and that it's a place for kids, but it's also a place that's great for everybody. So I'll move on into the discussion section of the webinar now. And so if we see some questions are coming in, please continue to put them into the Q&A panel. And I'll just kick off with the first question for all of you now, which is, I think one of the things that we and our partners have found is that it can be hard to engage people on air pollution when there are so many other issues to worry about, cost of living, safety, etc. Just a whole list of challenges that families and children are dealing with. So why did you feel that it was important to engage local residents, and especially families and children, in your work? And how did you persuade them to get involved? So I'll leave it, feel free to unmute or raise your hand. Any of you can go first. Thank you. Loreto.
Okay. So for us, involvement of the community has been done through this collaborative work that we have done with municipalities, preschools, and universities. We work with this triangle, and when we monitor the schools, we enter the community. Because children and the teachers, they show what the air quality is, and the parents get involved and they teach the parents and the community, the surrounding area. So, for example, in the case of Peru, Brazil, Chile, Quito, the municipalities have been very proactive in the community participation, and they have always been very open, of course, and they are pushing the participation for and showing how this monitor, what is this measuring, and what the values are, etc. So with that said, they also have organized, for example, biking day for clean air, or educational workshops in recovered spaces, as well as tree planting day, etc. So work has also been carried out. This is for example, by the local governments, but also because we work with university, the University of República de Uruguay, for example, they carried out work with the health community and the patients, and where the pre-med school students used Nuevos data and all the content that we have developed, the educational content, and to raise public awareness in the hospital, for example. In the case of, for example, municipality of Quito, again, in terms of like how we enter the community, they developed cultural days in which a play is performed, along tree planting day, and several educational workshops. So that's with the university and the local governments. And preschools, or schools, with collaboration with the local governments, they take different actions to prevent air pollution, and they have started like campaigns such as no idling or tree plantation, or they participate in environmental fairs in which they have promoted the air quality problem among the communities. All activities that before they were not done. I mean, before air pollution was focused more in like in the big industry source and not related to more like the people's daily activities. So in all these cases, I think that the important moves is that the community is being monitored, is involved by, as I said, by downloading the app, knowing what is the real time data of air quality. That is a way of empowerment. And so this information that is available for them, they get the opportunity to supervise what kind of air quality their children are breathing. And it has happened that they have demanding for some changes to the local representative, and starting, for example, asking for avoiding garbage burning in their area, which is a big issue in Latin America, or recovering green spaces, which is also a big issue in cities, as we have seen in Quito, for example, or Lima. So we think that the neighbors' participation ensures, of course, that any action taken to reduce air pollution makes sense to them, as they understand the benefit to their children's health and well-being, and that any intervention, even if it's a small one, lasts longer since they feel that it belongs to them too. So, yes.
Thank you, Loreto. So are you saying that just the availability and accessibility of this air quality data is something that really compels people to engage with the quality of their air that they're breathing in a way that they might not have before, when it seemed a little bit more of a faraway issue?
Exactly, because it's like they realize that, because it's something that they don't see with their, even they can see like in the long distance, but they don't see what they are breathing in their everyday life when they walk their kids to school, or when they see they can see the numbers now. They understand if it's red, they cannot exercise that day, for example. So it empowers them. And if the local government wants to intervene, for example, a place to recover and to reduce the air pollution exposure of children, they are more willing to participate. And if they participate and they, for example, paint a mural, or they plant a tree, or they decide to make calming zones, or if they decide to start with school routes, they are willing to be part of it and feel proud of it too. That's what we have been seeing. I think that's the right way to go, of course. It's like watching the Weather Channel, but for air pollution, right?
Thank you, Loreto. Great. Well, Maria, how about you? You mentioned about working with neighbors to count the trucks. Can you tell us a little bit more about, in general, how do you work to engage and mobilize, well, your neighbors and fellow community members on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, our organization is part of a movement here in the US, right? To recognize that a lot of these issues are, first off, they're systemic, right? So it's nobody in the community's fault. We didn't decide to put all these incinerators and power plants in our neighborhood. And so this idea of community defense is like easy to get people behind, right? Like, we are here together and we have to defend our neighborhood against further environmental injustice, right? That is because of race, it's because of class. And so it's something we inherently own. It's we've been subject a lot to like experimentation, if you will, from academics who are like, here's an intervention, right? And it's not always culturally relevant or sensitive to our community. It's often putting the blame also on us, like we should clean up our trash intake, and not looking at the systemic issue. Like, even if everyone in the neighborhood had zero waste, absolutely zero, it wouldn't end the incinerator today. You know, this is a systemic problem. And so one thing we try to do is not frustrate our community members with saying that they're going to change everything. It's more about focusing always on this collective. When we come together, we change the rules of our situation. We change the law. That's how we got the most progressive environmental justice law in the country. And for us, it often starts with just pointing out the problem, right? Pointing out the power plants. Like, that's not normal, you know. And even for me, I'll say, I was used to the way my neighborhood smelled for a long time. I just thought that's how, you know, urban cities smell. And then I went to other places and I realized they have different air. Like, the air smells differently. It doesn't wake them up at night, because it smells, you know, we have a fat rendering plant also in our neighborhood and a waste treatment facility. So our campaign's really been to end sacrifice zones, what we call sacrifice zones in the United States and globally, and plugging in our neighbors to something that feels both local and global. I think that that's the key. It feels like you're a part of something, being away at it, but you're actually looking at how to change the rules and policies, you know? So we give people multiple entry points, but recognize that no one's going to do it for us, right? We have to do this for ourselves. And we are the most invested stakeholders because it's where we live. You know, we're not just coming to study the area or to do a tour and check it out, but we actually live here and experience the realities every day.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, I think that this is really fascinating, this idea of community defense and coming together against it, and just pointing out the problem. And I think the piece about plugging the local change into this bigger global, are you thinking about it primarily across the US, or is it even bigger in terms of the solidarity that you're trying to build?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially now when pollution's intersecting with climate change, realizing, you know, we're all going to be affected, but some of us that are already vulnerable are going to affect it even more, right? And that tracks along air pollution lines, of course. And so I'm part of the Climate Justice Alliance, which is just communities like mine across the US. But then the Climate Justice Alliance is a part of global alliances as well. You know, we all go together to COPs to figure out what are the situations for our communities across the world. I think we need to all stick together and see this not as localized problem. You know, it's local manifestations of a global situation.
Thank you, Maria. I'll save my question for a second. Simon, maybe over to you to talk a little bit, to continue what you began in your presentation just now. And then I think we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience as well.
No, I really like that point from Maria just there about, I mean, we think about it as, we think about health as a systemic issue, and especially about early childhood health and the way that kids are able to be raised by their parents, like, and basically what the physical environment how the physical environment enables parenting or child rearing. And it's a systemic issue. This is the role of government, is to create a built environment which enables healthy parenting. And when it comes to air pollution, we don't find that air pollution per se is the most motivating factor or the most motivating issue when talking to people on the ground. But also, like, in my opinion, it kind of doesn't need to be, because like, it's not about changing people's behavior on a personal level. Like, I don't actually need you to care that much. I need you to care about your street, and I need you to, I mean, you know, like, I can talk to you about other things which may be more resonant to you, which are connected to cleaning up the air and reducing your exposure to vehicles and their exhaust. And one of the ways that we do that is we just throw street parties. We just throw street parties in front of schools. We close the street, and we try to create environments that somehow illustrate a future possible street that would be much more enjoyable as a public space than the current one is. And if there's some air pollution zealots that come to that, that's awesome. And if they become champions within their neighborhood, we want to give them the tools to empower them to do that. Like, we have those tools, but again, I don't think we're going to force it on anybody, because people are busy, and they, I think also in a place like Tirana, there's a lot of just change fatigue. The city is changing so fast that, asking them to be concerned about this issue, like you kind of pointed out, Patrin, like, people are worried about so much. The price of bread is 30% higher than it was 2 months ago, and that you're also going to stress them out with this other thing about how their kid is being exposed to all this stuff that they're not learning well in school. It can really feel like you're piling on too much, and we don't want to be in that position where we're piling on and it doesn't feel good. Like, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, even though there is plenty to bear. I want to be the bearer of an amazing, great street that happens to prevent your exposure to all of this stuff. And it's just I feel like everybody is just much more excited to participate if you're giving them a positive change and something which is perceived to them as being fun. Like, it's not trite to be fun, even though it sounds kind of cheesy. It's like not, like, it's really powerful, actually. And it's something that I think, especially for kids, right? Like, who wants to go into a classroom and go talk to kids about how bad the area is outside? They don't have any control over that. There's nothing, other than kind of marching, like showing their support, but they don't have the power to do that personally. And I think we as an NGO have the power to work with a city on a systemic change toward reducing their exposure to cars. I think that's our work. I don't think our work is scaring people into action. And I think, maybe that's somebody else's work. I think that can be also a good work, honestly, is like, we need to obviously be communicating these issues. It's just not my work.
Yes, yeah, I cannot believe we only have 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to try to close us up with this. I think we could talk for so much longer, but I think what I'm really struck by is that point that you just made, Simon, that actually that there are many different approaches to this, which I think each three of you have illustrated really beautifully. We've got somebody who's working primarily from the data side and empowering different parts of the community with data. We've got someone who's working very much from a climate justice and just transition, and let's come together to protect our communities from the front lines of climate change perspective. And then we've got you coming from the perspective of just creating really visual, concrete manifestation of what a better future could look like. So I think it's an amazing set of complementary approaches that I hope we can talk more about that at another time. But we've got one quick question from the audience for Loreto. Loreto, if you could answer it super quickly, that would be amazing, and then I'll wrap us up. So the question is, how frequently should schools measure air quality for timely interventions? Maybe that's a long question to answer.
Yes, for timely intervention, what we are doing with preschools, and now I'm having a different opinion than Simon, but that's a good thing too. We are now they are having this kind of lights, like traffic lights, where they show like how the air quality is when they enter. So we don't want to scare people, but what they do is, like, in every recess, they go and try to change the color of the lights, of the traffic lights, according to how the air quality is outside. So they kind of reorganize what kind of exercise they can do that day. So it's like the empowerment, but also is like, I know that they don't have the power to change the laws, but at least we start like, and I know it's cheesy again, but this seed that you start in the children to empower themselves to be a future environmental activist. That's what we wanna try to settle in this case. So for us, it's like in every recess when they start like, I'm talking in preschools because I think schools, it's different. I think the schedule is way harder to organize, but for children, small children, they can kind of like know how much exercise they can do that day. So
Thank you, Loreto. Great. Okay, I'm apologies, and we are going to go over by a couple of minutes, but I really want to give our speakers the last word. So I'll give them a final question to answer, and then we'll close up. So to our dear speakers, what is your message to prospective funders interested in children and their health?
To me?
All three of you. Loreto, you can go first.
Okay, but Maria, you go first.
Ay, tough one. I would say to trust communities, trust communities. They're the experts and they're more aware than you think, even when they're so busy. I find that people are really paying attention, and when they're engaged, it's actually the strongest because they have the strongest case to make to policymakers. They'll make sure that it gets enforced afterwards. So it's really long-lasting change. It has to happen bottom up. It can happen top down.
Thank you, Maria.
Should I? Okay. Yeah, I think it's really, really important that all philanthropy moves toward funding infrastructure. I think it's all about streets. Patrin, I love that that piece that you opened with. It really is about streets. Kids' lives begin at their front door and not a much bigger radius than that. And their understanding of the city begins from the understanding of their block. And far too often, especially in the childhood health space, I would say, there's too much emphasis on like education only somehow, like basically soft stuff. And I think that it's really, really important in this moment when cities have to be radically changed right now, physically, to adapt and mitigate extreme weather, especially. We have to give cities the tools to take risks and de-risk new infrastructure, new forms of streets. And I think philanthropy has a really important role to play in that. And we see that cities just aren't doing it fast enough because they have all of this, pressure from the public. But I think philanthropy gives cities a really good cover also to do these tests. And I think that's really what their role should be. And then that, that's how we're going to move the public and government's decision makers all toward this common goal, is just to sort of bring the money and let it be implemented.
Thank you, Simon. And Loreto. Loreto? Oh, have we lost you? I think we have lost Loreto, which is very unfortunate. Okay, everyone else is still here. All right, well, Loreto, so sorry. Maybe you can give us your answer by email and then we will put it into the follow-up blog. But just to close, it has been really wonderful to hear from the three of you. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights today. To our audience, the next webinar will focus on resources for clean air for children. So this is very much to our funding question that we ended with. To stay up to date with future events, please subscribe to Clean Air Fund's newsletter. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.